Previously on The Walking Dead audio comic. Officer Rick Grimes, while trying to apprehend the suspect, is shot and wounded as his partner Shane Walsh watches in horror. Rick wakes up in a hospital bed, but the hospital is abandoned. As he makes his way through the hospital, he encounters a horde of dead people in the cafeteria who try to attack him. He escapes from the hospital and makes his way back to his neighborhood to find his family, but is knocked cold by a young boy who thinks he is one of the creatures. After awakening from being knocked unconscious, Morgan Jones tells Rick what he knows of the situation. Rick, Morgan, and Morgan's son Dwayne make their way to the police station where Rick worked. There, they collect weapons and ammo to defend themselves from the creatures they've been encountering. Rick gives Morgan one of the police cruisers and tells Morgan he is off to find his wife and son, who he thinks made their way to Atlanta. And now, issue 2 of The Walking Dead audio comic. Darkness surrounded Officer Rick Grimes on the lonely drive to Atlanta. The highway was empty, and the only light came from the full moon above and his car headlights, which illuminated the way. As the sun came up, he could clearly make out abandoned cars that littered the roadway and bodies that littered the grass nearby. Eventually, he came upon a sign that read, "Welcome to Georgia." He had finally arrived. A short way past the sign, Rick pulled into a little gas station that was abandoned like everything else. He pulled to the nearest gas pump and got out of the car to fill up the tank. As he removed the nozzle, he could see there was no electricity running to the pump for it to work. "God damn it, not again!" Rick screamed as he gave the gas pump a swift kick. He climbed back into the car and started to head out of the station in search of gas. As he pulled out, he passed an abandoned car with the driver's side door open. Inside lay the owner, decomposing, flies buzzing around the body in the Georgia heat. Rick just stared and slowly drove by, his mouth open, but nothing to say. He continued down the lonely highway that passed through fields of grass, driving by abandoned car after abandoned car. Eventually, his car started to knock and buck, then finally died altogether. "Damn it!" Rick exclaimed. He had just run out of gas. He walked around to the passenger side door and pulled it open. On the seat lay the duffel bag he had filled with weapons and ammo back at the station. He reached in the car, grabbed the bag, and threw it over his shoulder. He shut the door and began the long, lonely walk the rest of the way to find his family. As he made his way several hundred feet from the car, something caused him to pause for a moment. Did he see what he thought he was seeing out of the corner of his eye? "Huh," Rick said to himself as he turned his head to the right. Off in the distance, past a wooden fence and a field of thick, tall grass, was a farmhouse. Rick made his way towards the fence, climbed over, and headed for the house. Maybe he would find someone there who could help. Cautiously, he made his way through the heavy field of grass and walked up the stairs towards the front door. Rick approached the door and gave it a couple of knocks to see if anyone would answer. "Anyone home?" he called out when there was no response as he placed his hand on the door handle. "I'm coming in." He turned the handle and slowly pushed the door open. "I'm not here to hurt or rob you. I just need some gasoline." As he took a step inside the house, there was a strange smell coming from the room immediately to his left. Rick turned to enter the room and stopped suddenly, a wave of shock coming over him. "Ah!" he yelled as he quickly covered his mouth with his hand. On the floor of what must have been the living room lay 3 bodies decomposing, bullet holes in their foreheads, flies buzzing about. One of the bodies held a Bible, while the one next to it, a young girl, held a stuffed teddy bear. In the chair closest to the entryway, just beneath the crucifix, sat another body, a revolver in its hand. Rick couldn't stand the sight or the smell in the room. He quickly turned and ran out the front entranceway, his hat flying off in the process, grabbed onto the post by the front stairs, and threw up into the tall grass. Slowly, he composed himself, wiped his mouth with the sleeve of his jacket, and started to make his way down a small dirt path towards a barn. As he reached the barn doors, he removed the wooden board that held the doors shut and slowly pulled them open. As the door opened, he called out, "Hello!" but there was no response. Inside the barn, he could see a horse in its stall, some chains hanging from the ceiling, and various cans and bags that lay about. On a table nearest the stall lay a saddle, and stuck in the top of the table was a hand axe. Rick made his way towards the horse and gently put one hand on the bridle and the other hand on the horse's nose, softly rubbing it. "Hey, girl, they leave you in here all alone?" Rick said, trying to reassure the horse he wasn't going to harm it. He walked over to the table and grabbed the saddle. As he lifted it up, he said to the horse, "I sure could use your help, if you're interested. I'm trying to get to Atlanta to see my wife and son." He opened the stall door, and as the horse slowly made its way out, Rick placed the saddle on the horse and said, "You ever been to Atlanta? It's not really that far away." As he walked behind the stall door to close it, he looked down at the hand axe sticking out of the table. "You mind if I take this? I think it might come in handy." He yanked the axe out and walked over to the horse, placed one foot in the stirrup, grabbed the saddle horn, and said, "You ready, girl?" He pulled himself up onto the horse, and with a burst the horse and rider made their way out of the barn and down the path. "Let's go!" Rick yelled, a smile on his face as the horse took off at a gallop. Rick and the horse made their way back to the highway where the police cruiser had stalled out. As the horse galloped through the tall grass, Rick hung on for dear life. "Slow down, girl! I know you've been in that barn for a while, but you're gonna wear yourself out." The horse, not paying attention to what Rick had to say, approached the fence that separated the field from the roadway and leaped over as Rick leaned forward so he wouldn't fall off. "Whoa!" he called out, pulling back on the reins as the horse reared up and came to a stop by the road. "That's better," Rick said to the animals that slowly walked onto the asphalt surface of the roadway. "I don't want you passing out before we get there." Together, Rick and the horse made their way off towards Atlanta, the car now a fleeting memory in Rick's mind. As they moved further and further down the road, Rick asked the animal, "So, you got a name?" "You know, that's a good idea. Talking about the happiest day of my life will surely get my mind off all the messed up shit I've seen recently," Rick said to the horse as they continued the lonely walk down the highway. With a smile on his face, Rick continued the one-sided conversation. "I'd just gone into work that morning. Was sitting at the station drinking my cup of coffee for the day. Gilroy was telling me about the drunk they brought in the night before, then the call came. It was my wife, Lori. Her water had broken not 10 minutes after I left. I grabbed my coat and ran home to get her. Got Gilroy to call Doc Stevens so he could meet us at the hospital. I got her to the hospital without a hitch. One of the only times I got to use the sirens on my car. It was a small town we lived in. I held her hand the whole time. There were some complications, and she had to get a cesarean. Was really worried, but everything went okay. First time I laid eyes on little Carl, Rick's expression changed, and the smile faded from his face as he thought about his wife and son. Slowly, he put his head down as he fought back the emotion that swept over him. "You know, on second thought, thinking about the good times makes all this seem so much worse," Rick said, and after, he and his traveling companion moved on in silence. The city of Atlanta slowly came into view as Rick and the horse continued their walk down the highway. Cars lay abandoned on the overpass they crossed, and debris littered the roadway all around. They took the closest exit ramp to them and descended to the streets below. Slowly now, they made their way along the surface streets, the clop of the horse's feet and the echo the only sound. Rick cautiously looked around for signs of life, or death as they passed building after building, store after store, all abandoned. Windows were shattered, and obscene graffiti covered some of the buildings. Papers littered the streets everywhere. As they passed an alley next to a destroyed coffee shop named Cafe Mocha, some of the papers began to rustle. A lone body that had been hidden by the papers slowly sat up and made a low, groaning sound. The creature, now fully sat up, pulled itself out of the alley and tried to follow the horse and its rider down the road. Behind it, further down the alley, more creatures made their way towards the street, the clop of the horses' feet awakening their curiosity. Suddenly, Rick pulled tight on the reins to bring the horse to a stop. "Shit!" he said as a mob of creatures suddenly appeared in front of him. They had heard the sound of the horse moving through the street and came out to investigate. Rick had failed to notice for the moment that creatures were coming from behind him as well. "Come on, girl, let's get out of here," Rick said as he pulled the horse's reins to turn the horse around to get away from the approaching mob. "Shit, shit, shit, shit," he said as the horse turned towards the creatures behind him that he hadn't noticed. As the creatures closed in, the horse reared up, throwing Rick from its back. "Ah!" he screamed as he fell from the horse to the hard street below. "Ugh!" As Rick started to sit up from the fall, he watched as the crowd of creatures ignored him and made their way towards the horse. Clawing and grabbing, the horse eventually was pulled down by the undead mob. The horse screamed in terror and pain as the creatures clawed and ripped at its skin, pulling the flesh away as it tried in vain to escape. Rick just watched, stunned at the scene unfolding before him, until one of the creatures shambling by turned to look directly at him. The creature groaned as it now started to move towards him. "Shit!" Rick yelled out as he pulled the hand axe from his belt. As the creature reached down to grab him, Rick buried the axe in the skull of the creature. As it fell to the ground, Rick slid over so the creature would not land on top of him. "Oh!" he said as it hit the ground, silenced by the axe blow. Quickly he stood up, grabbed his bag, and yanked the axe from the skull of the creature as some of the others turned their focus on him. "Son of a bitch!" he said as a few of the creatures surrounding the horse started their way towards him. As they did, Rick could see for the first time what they had done and were doing. The creatures had pulled the poor horse apart and were greedily tearing and scooping intestines and flesh from the body and shoving it in their mouths. They climbed over one another, trying to grab any scrap of meat that they could. Rick's face turned to one of anger. "Bastards! What the hell is wrong with you?" he screamed out at the creatures as he pulled his revolver from its holster. He fired into the crowd of creatures devouring the horse. First hitting the remains of a young woman in the arm who shuffled towards him. He then let loose with a barrage of bullets, hitting the young woman again, this time in the forehead. A young man, dressed in a suit, possibly a professional, was hit in the jaw, and another man, dressed in a leather jacket, was hit through the eye, blowing out the back of his skull. As another creature approached, Rick swung the axe, hitting it in the side of the neck, almost completely severing the head. He quickly removed the axe and made his way down the alley next to the coffee shop to escape. As he ran, something grabbed the collar of his jacket and yanked him to a stop. "Whoa!" Rick screamed out as he turned to see what had gotten hold of him. A young Asian kid, not older than his 20s, wearing a New York Yankees baseball cap, windbreaker, and carrying a backpack, had pulled Rick into a side alley. "I can get you out of here," the young man said as he looked around the corner of the alley, holding one hand on Rick to keep him back. "Follow me." Seeing nothing coming towards them, the young man ran down the alley, turning back to look at Rick, who was a few steps behind. "And stop using that gun. You'll have the whole city on us." As they reached the end of the alley, the young man jumped up on a dumpster to grab the ladder of a fire escape. Rick stood and watched as the mob of creatures started to make its way towards them slowly, still very far off. "Don't worry about them," the young man said, turning back to look at Rick. "We'll be long gone before they get down here." He then held out his hand as Rick lifted his revolver. "Stay there." With a giant leap, the young man launched from the dumpster, grabbing the fire escape ladder, pulling it down to the ground. "Got it on the first try." As he began to climb, he looked back at Rick, who was still standing with a shocked look on his face, his gun in one hand, the axe in the other. "Come on, man," the young man said as he took another step up the ladder. "I'm trying to save your life here. What are you waiting on?" Rick turned to look at the young man, the shock still on his face. He made his way towards the ladder and started to climb as the young man reached the first floor of the fire escape. "Sorry," Rick said as he reached the first platform and pulled himself up onto it. "It's just, I've never seen so many of them." The young man climbed the rest of the way up the ladder until he reached the roof of the building. As he stepped off of the ladder, he turned back towards Rick, who was right behind him, and said, "Then you're a lucky man. That's nothing down there. Had you gotten 50 more feet into the city before they attacked, you would not be here right now." As he stepped onto the roof, the young man turned around and grabbed Rick's hand to help him up the rest of the way, the weight of his duffel bag making it slightly difficult to climb. Just as he took his hand, Rick looked the young man square in the eyes and questioned, "What?" "Come on, we must hurry," the young man called back to Rick as he took off at a run across the rooftop. Rick watched him for a few seconds, then held out his hand and yelled out, "Wait!" With a giant leap, the young man vaulted across a gap between buildings, landing safely on the other side. Rick approached the edge of the building the young man had just leaped across and looked down at the drop. "No!" he said, knowing that a fall from that height would kill him, or at least seriously injure him, and that the creatures would then finish him off. "No way in hell!" On the other side, the young man looked over at Rick and explained to him, "You're going to have to. Listen, it's easy. I do it all the time. When we climb down this building, those things will still be waiting for us at the bottom of that building. And there's no way out of that one. All these buildings are filled with zombies. Trust me." There was the word Rick hadn't yet heard. Zombie. He knew the name from countless movies, but never expected to see one in real life. Now he was threatened by hundreds of them. He realized the young man was right. There was only one way out, to make the jump. He backed up halfway across the rooftop to get a good running start, the duffel filled with weapons and ammo still across his back. "God damn it!" he said out loud as he steeled himself for the run. He took off at a clip, and as he reached the edge, made a mighty leap over to the other building, but fell short, hitting the side, his hat flying off of his head. Luckily, he grabbed the ledge to keep himself from falling to the alley below. Oof! The young man, who had been several feet back, ran over to grab Rick before he fell and quickly pulled him to safety. "Jesus, man," he said as Rick scrambled over the ledge to safety. "You should have thrown the duffel bag over first." Rick looked at him as he picked up his hat and placed it back on his head and said in a sarcastic tone, "Now you tell me." The young man started to walk across the rooftop to the fire escape located on the other side. As he did, he gave a glance back at Rick and said, "We've got to hurry before they spread out again. When we climb down this building, be ready to run. Don't worry, we don't have far to go." Rick followed as the young man got to the fire escape ladder and started to climb down. As he got onto the first step just over the ledge, he stopped and looked at Rick. "We're not in the clear yet, but this building is close to the woods at the edge of the city. We've got to run about a block before we get to them, and there's liable to be a few of those things on the way. As long as we keep moving, though, they shouldn't be able to surround us." The young man reached the platform a few steps below the roof and said to Rick as he started to climb down the ladder, "Those things are slow as hell, so you should be able to maneuver around them. Don't use your gun, and don't let them touch you. One bite, and it's all over for you." As Rick got to the bottom step of the ladder, he acknowledged the instructions he was just given. "Got it." As he reached the bottom of the ladder, the young man jumped off and took a few cautious steps down the alleyway. When Rick got down, the young man looked back at him and said, "This way." Both of them took off running down the alleyway until they reached a wooden fence at the end. The young man pushed aside a loose board and started to squeeze through as Rick kept a lookout for any creatures. "From this point on is where we need to be careful," the young man said to Rick as he pushed through the fence. Still cautiously looking down the alley, Rick replied, "Gotcha." Rick pushed his duffel bag through the fence opening and slowly crawled his way through, one hand on his hat to keep it from falling off his head. As he popped his head through, the young man who was standing in front of him looking for creatures said, "It's not far now." As Rick finally got through the fence, he collected the duffel off of the ground, and him and the young man took off running along the fence line towards the woods that were just past a few small warehouses. "Heads up!" the young man called out to Rick as they continued their run. Sitting against the fence was one of the creatures with a surprised look on what was left of its face. "I didn't even see it!" Rick exclaimed with an aloof look. The young man looked back at him, a stern look on his face. "You're going to have to keep your eyes open, man," the young man said, scolding Rick. "Where have you been for the past month?" "Coma," Rick replied as they reached the tree line and entered the woods. Rick was now running almost neck and neck with the young man when he turned back to Rick and said, "Seriously?" Rick, still running at a good clip, replied, "Yeah, I woke up in the hospital yesterday. All the running had worn Rick out. He hadn't done this much physical exercise since before he was shot and was seriously out of shape. He slowed down and put his hand on the young man's shoulder. "Can we stop here? Is it safe?" Rick asked, trying to catch his breath. "For a minute," the young man said as he looked at Rick. "What you said about the city earlier, how dangerous it is. Where are all the people that were there?" Rick asked, still confused about everything that's been going on around him. That was them trying to eat us back there," the young man started to explain to Rick. "You can't go into the cities anymore. Everyone that was there is dead. The government tried to herd everyone into the city so it would be easier to protect. All that did was put the food in one place. Every time one of those things kills one of us, we become one of them. It took a week for just about everyone in the city to be killed. After that, we don't know. Nobody can get in or out. Did you have family there?" Rick's legs started to shake, and he fell to his knees in the thick grass. "My wife," he said, choking out the words as emotion overtook him. "My son." He knew that with the whole city turned into flesh-eating creatures, if they had come to Atlanta, they were more than likely gone. Slowly, his head dropped into his hands as tears streamed down his face. He couldn't bear to be without his family. The young Asian man made his way over to Rick and placed his hand on his shoulder to try and comfort him. "I'm sorry, man," the young man said. "I hate for you to have to hear it this way." Rick lifted his head, tears still streaming from his face as he tried to compose himself. Wiping the tears from his eyes, he looked over at the young man and said, We're from Kentucky. But when I was told people were ordered to larger cities, I figured my wife would have taken my son to her parents' place, here in Atlanta. They may not have come, but I don't know where else they'd be." The young man, with confidence in his voice, said, looking at Rick still, "Don't give up hope, man. I've seen all kinds of people that have survived some crazy shit. We've got a guy at camp that actually made it out of Atlanta." Rick started to stand up, wiping what was left of the tears from his eyes. As he did, he asked the young man, "Did you say camp?" As Rick gathered himself together, the young man started to walk off in the direction they had been going before they stopped. As he did, he called back to Rick, "Yeah, that's where we're headed. There's more people there." The two kept moving slowly across the grassy field. None of the creatures were around yet, at least none that had made it this far into the wooded area. As they walked side by side, the young man said to Rick, "We're almost there. Come on." Rick stopped for a moment, but the young man who was still walking looked back at Rick and continued, "We're mostly latecomers, people that tried to get into Atlanta too late, like you. We couldn't get in, so we set up camp here." Rick's curiosity was piqued a little as the two kept moving further into a tree-lined area towards the camp. "So you're just camping out here? Is that safe?" The young man looked over at Rick and replied to him, "Yeah, we've got some cars for shelter, and we all take turns keeping watch at night. We figure if we stick close to the city, they'll be able to find us when the government sorts all this mess out." They continued on a little further until they came to a small clearing. Rick could see over in the distance a small camper and a car. They were in a nicely hidden area where the creatures seemed unable to get to them. As the two stopped for a moment to look at the camp, the young man said to Rick, "Here we are." Suddenly, a shocked look came across Rick's face as his mouth fell open. "Holy shit!" He barely muttered out as from behind a car and through a crowd of survivors, his wife, a middle-aged, dark-haired woman, came running. "Rick!" she screamed, a look of happiness across her face as she ran towards her husband. At the front of one of the other cars, a group of children were playing when one of them, a young boy with short dark hair, jumped up and started running in Rick's direction as well. "Dad!" the boy yelled out as he closed in on his father. Rick's wife and son ran into his arms, and as they grabbed each other, a sigh of relief came over Rick. "Oh, thank God," he softly said as the family embraced one another. He didn't want to let them go ever again, but at least for now, in his arms, he knew they were safe for one more day.